Call this joint meeting of the Board of Selectmen, School Committee, and Finance Committee to order. First, would you all join me in a Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And before we get down to too much business this evening, I'd like to ask the Chair of the Finance Committee to introduce her new members.
Yes, we do have 3 new members of the Finance Committee, and I would like to congratulate John Curlin for securing some wonderful candidates, and luckily they've accepted. Tom?
Okay, our new members are Kathy Duffett, I believe that you all know her, Jim Clancy, and Margarita Colavedas, I think is how you spell her last name, I'm not sure. But they'll be joining us, and they have terms that run through the end of, I believe, 2016. 2017, maybe, I'm not sure. It's a 3-year term, 2017. So welcome.
Thank you.
Do you want to say a few words, Kathy? Just give us a brief summary of your...
Try to keep it under 30 minutes.
Oh, see, I promised I wasn't going to laugh. I think that's all we need to say about me. I'm looking forward to this, and it's great to see people I haven't seen in a while.
Thank you very much.
Okay, good to have you back around this table. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Darlene Lucia to go over a recap of the budget year that we just finished and give us a status on that.
Okay, thank you, Pat. The first page that I just did printouts. I'm not doing a PowerPoint presentation, but the first to start off is the receipts year to date through June 30th. We did close out our books. We still are waiting for some interest to come in for June and some investment savings that come in. The statements, we have to wait for the bank statements to come in, and most of them are in, but we are waiting for a few more that John thinks that will be in sometime later this week. So pretty much these are the final, but these are mostly the final numbers except for those 2 categories, which won't change too much. So I felt really comfortable with going ahead and doing these numbers. Local receipts, you'll see that we made that number. We budgeted for $8.2 million, and $9.5 million came in under local receipts. We're 14% higher than last year and 16% of the budgeted amount of the 8.2. What makes the big category that up there is the motor vehicle excise tax. We budgeted $4.2 million, 4.7 came in, so we were 11% higher than the amount that we budgeted. So to me, that just gives a sign that the economy is getting better. People were out buying cars. What I did do attached to this sheet, you'll see that there's a I got off the DOR website. It just shows our actuals for motor vehicle since 2001 till last year, 2013. You can see that we're pretty much what we collected this year is pretty much around where we were at 2006. And usually what we see happen is when we have one year there's high, the next year, people are not going to be out running out and buying new cars. It's pretty much we've hit our peak at that point, because you can see what happened in 2007. We went from 4.7 million, then we collected 4.1. I predict that that's going to happen again for fiscal 15. We'll see not a $4.7 million revenue. We'll probably see the number of 4.2 or maybe $4.1 million collection for that. Just back to the revenues, though, if you can see the property tax, 99.6% of our collection. I don't think we can get much better than that. That's fabulous. So, state reimbursement, 97%. There was a couple amounts. The choice money, the tuition money came in a little bit less than what the charter money is. A little bit less than what they had budgeted for. We see that a lot. It's not an exact. We don't get the exact number because at the time when they do the count, it's later after the budget's been set. So it's just sometimes that number is a little bit off, a little bit less than what we actually receive. And then other financing sources, those are just other financing sources. Other things, though, in local receipts, the permitting up by 14%. We did, well on much better on interest investments than last year, and a little bit better than what we actually budgeted for. So everything, that's very good news. We did very well on revenues this year. And that's kind of reflected in the free cash amount, which I will talk about in a little bit. Does anybody have any questions on the revenues? Yep, go ahead.
Just a quick, I'm just wondering on the real estate and personal property receipts.
Yep.
How did you get that many in, and how, on timely basis? How does that happen? It just seems to be very.
I can actually, I'll let John talk to that, our treasurer.
Usually what we see as the economy is beginning to strengthen, we have less, you always have some delinquency with tax collections, but we've seen less real estate headed for tax title, which is the first step in the lien process. And you also see just more people paying more timely. It's really just a reflection of the economy. We've remained aggressive on the collections, but it's more a reflection of, as the economy strengthens, you have less tendency towards delinquency.
If you flip over to my year-to-date budget status report, of course, the top half is just the revenues that we spoke about and then the second half is the expenditures. All the departments, like I always say, do very well budgeting their budget. We do have some encumbrances that people are encumbering under municipal administration. That $37,000 is an encumbrance for the assessors for their reval update. They had some money left over in that line item that they're going to be doing some more reval next year. They needed to set aside that money, so that's what that money is. School department, $108,000 is their encumbrance that they'll be carrying over for their escrow amount. And then Public Works, the $46,000, they're going to be doing some work behind the town offices, that exit road that's going out behind in the ball field. They've already started working. The DPW is going to be doing some work there. There was some money left over. They encumbered it to get that work started, engineering work and stuff to do that. So that's what that money is set aside for. Two line items in there that are kind of returns to the town is you'll see the benefit lines and the debt and interest, $667,000 being returned on the benefits line. That's due to the health insurance savings costs that we did know about, and then the interest on the debt that we did also. John, I think, has
Yes,
yep,
we
has
completed
talked about
refunding.
Yep, for the refunding. So we're turning back about $980,000 in total. And so that's, like I said, the departments do very well. I have no issue. There was no problems in any of the departments when closing out their books for year end. So that brings me to the certification of free cash. How free cash is certified is you first start with your undesignated fund balance from the prior year. You take that and you back out things from the prior year. Then you net out your revenue and expenditures, any encumbrances, anything that you need to reserve on your balance sheet, and you come up with your starting undesignated fund balance is where the DOR then certifies the free cash amount. So we're starting, the year ending is at $4.3 million undesignated fund balance. What happens then is you back out any open receivables that we have to collect, and then any other deficits. Adding back your deferred will then is basically just that is your free cash. The sources of those free cash, I think I spoke most about, is your motor vehicle, and you'll see on that in the next page. The sources of those would be the department expenditure turnbacks, which were the departments, the benefit and the debt, plus surpluses that I had in revenue, which was motor vehicle, and under the non-recurring revenue, which we had a FEMA reimbursement and the sale of the premium of sale of bonds. So that's pretty much where that free cash number, the source of what that free cash number is made up of. one thing I do, what we do have to, now we have, if that number, now this $2.5 million is unaudited. I have not sent my reports yet to the Department of Revenue, so I caution you, that is the number I'm going to be sending to them. They'll audit it. We've seen in the past the Department of Revenue changes some, or makes me do some changes. So sometimes that number changes a little bit. But if this is the number that they do certify, we do have some reserved, that there is amounts that are reserved already in that $2.5 million. We have, Springtown meeting, we had a budget deficit of the $559,473 that we need, that needs to come to that, out of that number. And then what we do is we move interest from the general fund to the sewer betterment. John does a calculation for me every year out of what we collect in sewer betterment. That money is actually put into the general fund, and then it is moved out of the general fund over to the betterment account. So that $260,000, which will be a town meeting article at town meeting in the fall, will be voted at town meeting and be moved out. So I need those two amounts have to come off the 2.5, which will now bring you down to a number of free cash of 1.7 is what I'm looking at. That would be free for appropriation.
Melanie,
Yeah.
what are the areas that are most susceptible when it goes to DOR? What do they usually change?
Debt. Debt is a big piece of it. John and I, they really, they look at the debt. What else have
Sometimes
we seen?
how we treat bond premiums is sometimes they, depending on whether it's excluded debt, non-excluded debt, and sometimes, and Darlene will tell you, just you're working with the same department, but depending on the department head that you're working with DOR, sometimes the way it's handled can change from year to year, so we've experienced that over.
So it's somewhat subjective.
Sometimes it's their judgment call, but
Darlene, I'm just wondering if you could just mention to the public the footnotes that you have. They're really important.
Yes. That's what I wanted to talk about. So when you're talking about the sources of free cash, like I said, those are the sources. The department turnbacks, I had about $195,000 of department turnbacks. The benefits line was $668, and then debt was $122. And then the revenue surplus was the motor vehicle, $490,000 of excess surplus, and our non-recurring was $975,000, which was FEMA in the bond premium. The thing I want to talk about is the revenue surplus. These two sources are not, these two sources are sustainable every year. Like I just spoke about with motor vehicle. You know, we did 4.7 this year. I'm really thinking we're going to do probably like 4.1, or maybe we'll do the 4.2. But I'm thinking we're probably going to do 4.1 next year. So we'll probably just either break even. We're budgeting 4.2 million for fiscal 15. We'll probably just make that number. So we're not going to have a surplus in that line item for next year's free cash. I don't have any FEMA revenue. We didn't have any FEMA-related storms or anything, so there'll be no one-time money or anything coming from FEMA. And then because of our borrowing that we did for fiscal 15, we didn't have any big bond borrowings. So our sale of bond premium is going to be very small. Nothing to really speak about. So when I caution that you. When you look at this, there's really the big items are really just one-time monies that will not reoccur for next year. I don't see them reoccurring. I caution that when you decide regarding when you decide what was planned for the free cash. I don't make decisions on what people do with free cash. The only thing I will tell you, just factual information about what happens. If you use all of the free cash, say, to the tax base, you need to sustain that every year so that the tax rate doesn't do a yo-yoing up and down. That happened to us 2 years ago. In 2012, we put 907 to the tax base, but then fiscal 13, when I did the recap, because my free cash came in low in fiscal 13, we didn't have enough to put to the tax base. what happens is I have to then make that up. And that's why everybody went like, oh my goodness, my taxes went up like 5%. And I'm like, yes, because it was 2.5, plus I had to do another 2.5 because you didn't sustain that. That's what happens. And I don't know if people realize how that happens. When you take the money that you take to put to a tax rate, it's like using one times money. It goes away, and it lowers it comes right off the top of my undesignated fund balance, which you saw how free cash is certified, starting with your undesignated fund balance, and you back everything out. So if you're starting with a low undesignated fund balance, next year you're going to have a low free cash if you don't have one-time monies to subsidize that. So I just caution, that's just when you're thinking about what to do with monies.
I have a question. With respect to the motor vehicle amounts, is your reduction usually a linear reduction, or do you take into consideration that, okay, these people that bought these new cars are buying new cars in the future, the price of the car goes up,
Yeah.
so therefore the excise tax
Tax
goes
goes
up.
up.
So
Yeah,
it isn't a straight linear regression.
Right, I
Right.
agree.
Yeah, if I could just add to that, the reason that you see that, Tom, is because the depreciation schedule at the state that we have to follow under state law is when the car is new, you get about 90% of the MSRP. Then it's a really rapid depreciation schedule. It goes 90, 60, 40, 25. So when a car is just 5 years old, it's down to 10% of its value. So the town reaps the most motor vehicle excise when folks buy new vehicles, but then it starts depreciating. So all we want to, I think what Darlene was trying to show there is, when the economy has been strengthening now, people had been putting off purchasing new cars during the recession. Now we're seeing, and you could see with news reports, a lot of new vehicle sales have never been higher. But we just want to, get that information out there that it's probably not going to go up linear. We're most likely going to see a decline because a lot of the people that purchased new 2014 vehicles, it's unrealistic to think they're going to want to go out next year and buy another new car unless they really need it.
Darlene, I have a couple questions about the free cash. So when would we expect it to be certified? Would that be like early September, sometime around
Yes.
there? Okay.
I would say so, yeah. Yeah, I'd say early September.
Okay. And the FEMA reimbursement, what is that for? Is that like the snowstorm or?
Yeah, that was, that one was actually, we actually got, the state had promised us from a storm that we had in 2010, we got 75% from FEMA, and the state of Massachusetts said if they had a little extra money, they would give us the 25%, and that, most of that is the 25% that we got from a storm that was there was the ice storm of 2010.
Okay, so that's almost 4 years ago from that one, okay.
Yeah.
All right, so it takes a while sometimes for.
Yeah,
that
but there isn't,
through.
we received all of our FEMA money, anything that the DPW has put through, even up until the last couple of years. There was no storms last year, but the previous year, we did receive all that money, so.
Okay, so if we were to have a hurricane in September, we wouldn't expect reimbursement until,
It probably would be,
17.
yeah, it would probably
Okay.
be into the next fiscal year.
okay, at least.
Yeah.
Okay.
And just, when I was just talking about, I just want to give an example, because I have the free cash that was certified back in 13, just to tell you, I began my fiscal year 12 with a free cash number of, a fund balance of $3.8 million. Because we put a 907 we did a tax relief of 907, in that year, also in 2013, we actually had a deficit in our revenues. We had, our expenditures we expended more than our revenues that we took in. So with that happening, I then started, my undesignated fund balance went down to 1.9. So I lost almost $2 million right off the top, starting out with trying to get my free cash certified. So that's why last year's free cash came in at only the $894,000. So you can see what happens. So if next year you take $1.7 million, put it to the tax rate, and then if our expenditures exceed our revenues, then we then have another deficit, so you kind of get a double whammy, and then your free cash amount for next year would be very low. And then I don't know if you would have enough then to put to the tax rate again. They said you have to sustain that to keep your tax rate level. Because if not, then you get the spike, the highs and the lows every year.
So is the message that you're trying to send to this board is not to apply free cash?
It's not, I'm not making any recommendations, I'm just saying be cautious because of what happened last year. I know that there was a lot of publicity and I've heard a lot of people and in the public say, oh my God, my taxes went up so much last year. And the reason was because we put $1 million to the prior year, and last year we couldn't do anything. So when I do the recap, you have to make that up. It's just the way that it is. So I'm just cautious that we can give tax relief this year, but if you can't sustain it for next year, and that's why I'm saying that the revenue surpluses that we had this year are really one-time monies. If they weren't, then I probably would say, I think you might be okay for next year. I'm not saying I can predict what my free cash is going to be next year, but just looking at those two things, I know I'm not going to have $1.5 million in one-time monies next year. And that's just, I'm just kind of being, as a finance person, I'm just trying to caution people. I'm not telling anybody or just trying to give you the facts so that everybody's aware. So when you are making decisions, you have all the facts for making these decisions.
I agree. I mean, I think there was a lot of well-intention in applying that free cash, but I do agree that if that's the goal, is to actually return a portion of the taxpayers' money, it should be done on a consistent basis every year to avoid that.
Thank you, Janet. And to follow up on that, I just would like to ask Diane, Paul, and John their opinion as to the best way to achieve tax relief, if there is a way at all.
Well, you're just jumping right into it.
Oh, yeah, why
aren't you?
not?
I thought we were kind of leading up to something.
Well, I'll field the question first, and they can certainly chime in. The reason we're having these tri-board meetings is the fact that we have conflicting priorities. If the goal is property tax relief, then you're going to have to forgo something else. The way to provide relief is to make cuts, reduce services. On the other hand, if the school committee's goal is full-day kindergarten, we have to fund that. And one of our other priorities is to fund our true operating costs, which notably is the incurred costs that we're achieving on an operating basis each year for the health insurance of retirees and active employees. Then we should be funding our OPEB obligation. The reason we've initiated these meetings, and I believe it was at Patrick's suggestion when this thing first appeared at the Finance Committee meeting, was we can't do it all. We can't meet all priorities. And so if the question becomes, if the goal is property tax relief, well, then you've got to decide what other priorities. There's an opportunity cost with whatever you do. Just like there's an opportunity cost if you use the money for tax relief, that means you're not using the money for another objective of the community that has other goals aside from property tax relief. So the bottom line question is simply is, if you want to reduce taxes, then you've got to identify those services that you wish to cut. And I think what Darlene hasn't touched much upon this evening, although if you look at the numbers carefully and you listen to what she said, there's not a lot coming back from the department turnbacks. Meaning, when she talked about the money coming from the benefits and from the debt service, that's not departmental operations. That's not operating the police department, the fire department, general government, or the school department. There isn't a lot in those budgets, and in fact, and I don't want to dive too deep into this, but what you'll see if you really look into the numbers is traditionally the school department would encumber $500,000 going forward. This year, they're not able to do that, and it's not a criticism at the schools. It's just a reality of how tight the budgets are, because when you're operating within these constraints, and so the question becomes, well, why are these constraints so severe? And if you look at some of the data that I sent out in advance of the meeting at the end of last week, one of the problems is it's not that we're not taxing people enough; it's that we're not getting enough relief from other sources, notably the state. I mean, we have roughly the same amount of state aid in fiscal year 15 as we had in the fiscal year 2000.
And that's not adjusting for any of the cost of operations in that 15 years. So the bottom line is you've got limited funding sources. And if you, and obviously it always falls back to the property tax, because the state's going to give us what they're going to give us. And as we sit here today trying to move forward, we don't know who the next governor is going to be, or what the budget's going to be for local aid a year, 9 months from now. That's anyone's guess. And then we'll be trying to produce a budget that's going to start 11 months from now and run 23 months from now. So, that's why you see these cautions, is because, how do you foresee? I think if anything we've seen in the last several years is that it's a slow, bumpy economy. You seem to take, one step forward, a step back. It's a slow recovery. But the bottom line is it's difficult to sustain if the goal of property tax relief without really ultimately having an impact on services.
And I think it's really important for people to understand that there's no clear line as to a formula. I mean, there's so many formulas in your budget from so many different areas that it's extremely hard to forecast. And even the state numbers just fluctuate completely for 9 months out of the year, maybe. And so those are basically the 3 areas that we're all focusing in on, and it hasn't changed for 6 to 9 months. We've been talking about these 3 issues all along. And I think we need to continue talking about that and looking at other efficiencies. Believe me, I know that you look at a lot of efficiencies, but I also believe that there has to be something else that we can look at to create even a small efficiency that might help. I don't have the solution, but I'm just hoping that that's why the 3 boards are here, to try to find something.
I think there is another thing that we're overlooking. We are not, I don't think the purpose of these meetings is to create property tax relief.
No.
We are here to talk about, amongst other goals, residential property tax relief. And it seems to me that the best way to provide residential property tax relief is to build a bigger pie. We need a more vibrant business community in Chelmsford. To Bob's point, nobody wants to look like Route 1. I think that's fair to say. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't have any growth at all, and that we can't do a better job of growing the pie to provide some relief for the residential property owner. I think that's something that we need to consider more aggressively. I take Paul's point also about the reduction in local aid. The school committee, for much longer than I've been a part of it, has aggressively lobbied at the State House to protect Chapter 70 money. We've been fortunate enough to have a governor recently who has shared that priority, although I have to say his priority did not extend to local aid. We have a situation now where the lottery has record revenues and record profits, and somehow local aid is not at record levels. I think, again, there's work to be done there, that perhaps that's something for the Board of Selectmen to take the lead on, but I think we all need to pitch in on that. I think we all need to make sure that whoever gets elected knows that it's a priority to bring some of the money that's being paid by Chelmsford taxpayers to the state back into Chelmsford.
Taxpayers in Chelmsford pay $62 million in taxes to Boston, basically. Beacon Hill, $62 million. What do we get back? 12, 14, right? That's what we get back. That's the number.
I got a question for Mike. Are we negotiating a bus contract this year with the bus companies? No?
No, I think all of our contracts are settled
They're all
right
done,
now.
so there isn't a bus contract?
For the
We're
first
just
time
gonna
in
take a
long
big deep
time.
breath.
Not for a couple of years.
Okay.
I think we're all set with everything.
I agree with what Mike said. I mean, we do need to kind of grow the pot that we're taking from, and we do need to keep the pressure on our state legislators. And I remember that at our last meeting, we did talk about, aggressively building the business community, and we do try to do that. I know Evan Belansky in Economic Development is, reaching out, and Paul reaches out to local business owners. We also had brought up options about, what could we do about local options. We saw how when we had the opportunity to have a meals tax, how well that went. Everybody said, oh, nobody will come to Chelmsford to have dinner anymore, and they certainly did, and that grows every year. One thing that John mentioned that we had talked about a few years ago, and I think maybe could be revisited, is the formula for excise tax. It does seem to be kind of skewed. Yeah, when you first buy your car, your excise tax is quite high, but it goes down so quickly. If it were a more level, a more linear depreciation, that we get to, have that excise tax, that would raise our excise level so it would be more level too. Next year, as Darlene said, it's going to go down, maybe as much as $500,000 or more, just because everybody's car is 1 year older, but the depreciation goes down 50% or more.
That's a state formula.
Yeah, but it's
Exactly.
cyclical. It's cyclical. I mean,
Exactly. But
every year, everyone's car gets a year older, but then the following year, new people are getting, there's new cars coming into
But still, the ones that you do buy, it goes down quite significantly. And Tom, yes, it is
They
a
cost
state,
more.
it is a state formula, but so was the meals tax was a state initiative that we were able to take advantage of that. So I'm just saying it's another thing that maybe we should do some advocacy for. I mean, I don't know how well that would play on Beacon Hill either in a tax year, but maybe, in an election year, but maybe next year. It's something that would be beneficial to the communities and wouldn't be, I don't see a huge impact if, people who bought cars, didn't affect them, but only when you bought a new car that the depreciation would be at a slower rate than it is now.
But you say it's beneficial to the community, but it's also a detriment to the people that are buying cars.
Well, absolutely, but so's the meals tax.
Not so much. The meals tax is pretty small. You're talking about big numbers here. Buy a new car and look what it is for the first year. It's huge.
It is.
Yeah, it's huge.
It is. I know it is, but
just
then,
paid one, I
but then
know.
it goes down so quickly.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes.
Is there any opportunity with the Lowell Transit? Any opportunity in transportation? I mean, we know that Chelmsford has a lot of cars going through it. What about local transit? Is there anything else that we can look at?
You mean you're trying to get Lowell Transit to go into
Yeah,
to New
well-
Hampshire to drive for all those people that come from New Hampshire?
I don't know, I'm just trying to think of
No,
something.
I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, it's tough because the people that come through Chelmsford, the traffic, we can talk about traffic, are not people from
From
this
Chelmsford.
area. They're not from, they're probably not even from Tingsboro. A lot of them from New Hampshire. A lot of them are just coming from, they're coming up from Groton. They'll come down 40 and then come across, and it's crazy.
Well,
I don't know if you're going to be able to catch anything from a rapid transit, from a low rapid transit standpoint. There isn't a lot of advantages for someone to take rapid transit if it doesn't go near their work. That's the thing.
And if we have suggestions for routes that would better serve the LRTA, they are very amenable to that. I mean, right now, we have two major routes that go through Chelmsford. One of them goes up, well, I think both of them, in fact, go in the Drum Hill area around Technology Drive where, the medical facilities are. So those are huge. They go along Billerica Road where all the businesses are. They go out 110 all the way into Littleton to IBM and, along that route. So if there's other routes that we could benefit from, let me know, because we can get those, we
Do
can
we ever
probably
get
get those.
any usage figures from the LRTA?
We do. And I used to be on the board a few years ago, and it surprised me then how many trips. It was like 126,000 was the ridership per year.
Really?
And that was, like I said, 5-6 years ago. I'm sure it's increased now because I see buses that have a good number of people on them. They're not empty like they used to be going up Littleton Road and up Billerica Road. But I will get some statistics on that.
This might not bring in a lot of money, but I think we should look at a very aggressive pilot program, payment in lieu of taxes. We've got a lot of organizations in town that pay nothing for taxes that we're providing services for, police, fire, what have you. one of the things that comes to mind is with the building of the new parking lot down behind the town hall is a Little League. And Little League, I think certainly could impart a little money to us in lieu of taxes. They have a 99-year lease that was negotiated years ago. And in essence, if we take anything away from them, we got to replace it somewhere else. So, and some of the churches may be willing to contribute small amounts. It's not going to give us millions, but it would bring in other revenue that would be helpful.
Has anybody ever done that? Is that done at all in the state anywhere?
Well, I know Lowell does it.
Do
Yeah.
they do
Well,
it?
don't we have one? I think we have one.
You have
don't
one
we have-
with Harvard Vanguard.
Harvard Vanguard.
Yeah. Oh, and I guess you could say the Housing Authority does some in addition.
It's not a lot, though.
It's not a lot, but it's more than we would have otherwise.
Right, right.
Like you said, I mean, it's
But
probably not going to be a lot. for
I
me.
believe when we built Technology Drive, those are taxable buildings, right, Paul?
Yeah, the old
general
hospital buildings
Yeah, that was something that I definitely asked the question when they were looking to put another building in up there. So they pay taxes, so, you know, is it fair to other people in town that have businesses like that, that because they're a nonprofit, they don't pay or what have you? But it's just something I think we should think about. It is voluntary, but certainly can, you know, make a case for it. So.
Send a questionnaire out to those and ask them what they would think about it? I mean, some of them might give a positive response. It might
Mhm.
surprise you, I mean,
Yeah,
but,
and if it was backed up with,
make the right argument for it.
yeah, with a letter that talked about all the benefits that they receive from the town without taxation, that, you know, maybe that might work too.
Look at all those educational institutions in Boston that
Mm.
pay a donut, right? And look
Right.
at the space they occupy.
Right.
Anybody else? Paul, do you want to go over those, that information that you had sent, just to kind of recap the trends that you see?
Yeah, sure, I'll be glad to if you'd like that. Try to give some sense as to,
I have a question before Paul starts. How come we don't have slides up? This is being broadcast, right?
well, it is being broadcast, but apparently there's no sound to tonight's broadcast based on the messages we're receiving.
No.
Oh,
They've been notified.
So
And all the data that's here is available on,
Right.
by way of the town's
If they know. where to
linking
get
it.
Yeah.
If they link it to the town's agenda, it's all there.
Okay, all right, thank you.
But also, towards that end, thank you, Bob, towards that end, I think we should recognize the extraordinary effort that John and Darlene did to pull this information together. I mean, Darlene was on vacation, the book's fiscal year really closes July 15th, and here we are on the 21st. John's came back from vacation today from being away last week, and Darlene was away the previous week. And sort of, you can say, pushing everything together is quite an effort, and I just want to recognize them for doing that. Towards that end, in preparation for the meeting, I did pull some long-term data that I thought would be helpful, and for a couple of reasons. One is we often don't sort of look at long-term trends. We tend to be so focused on the immediate year and so forth. And also, we have some new membership on the Finance Committee and such that I thought would be helpful. But what is available, and I did share with you, and I'll sort of go in reverse order, I sent out last Friday, a comparison of the average single-family property tax bill for Chelmsford and basically the other Greater Lowell communities, towns, and the Greater Lowell towns, as well as a state average for the last 5, 10, 15, and 20-year increments. And I think the interesting part is, taxes may be up in Chelmsford, and then certainly they're up statewide, but I don't think we're an anomaly. And, Chelmsford has always been a relatively higher tax town. When you look at the rankings across the state, in terms of one being the highest ranked tax town in terms of the Wellesleys and the Westons, and going down to the 300s for the smaller towns out west. And we've often give this data at time of town meeting and so forth, but in essence, we've always been in that 60 to 70 range, and in some years, early 50s. But And that trend has continued despite what you may see as a short-term change. But clearly, you know, if you look at how we fare compared to the greater Lowell towns, we're all in the same situation. I mean, the tax increase, whatever period you want to look at, over a 20-year period, 10-year period, 15, 5, and so forth, the bottom line is we ought not to feel that we're somehow astray of what else is happening in cities and towns in this region and probably across the Commonwealth, because they even gave you the statewide data. We're often sort of subject to criticism that, you know, spending's out of control and taxes are out of control in Chelmsford. And I just think it's helpful if you look and say, well, wait a minute, you know, gee, let's look at an extended period of time, a 10-year period or maybe a 20-year, whatever your horizon wants to be. And I think the data shows is that Chelmsford has not fared worse, and in some cases fared slightly better than our neighboring communities over that same period. Other data that you see is the free cash as percentage of the budget. I mean, Darlene mentioned the 2.55 figure. You know, on the surface, you say, my goodness, 2.55 million, that's a lot of money. And yes, it is a significant amount of money. But when you realize that we're operating a, you know, $113 million revenue budget, it's roughly 2.25% of our operations. And as we've discussed at selectmen meetings and so forth, I mean, the statewide expectation from the Department of Revenue is your free cash is going to be somewhere between 3 and 5% of your budget. Like I said, we're at 2.25, and then I gave you the data in terms of what percentage it has been of the budget. Again, going back, you know, for you know, all the way going back, you know, to 20 years, going back to '94, you can see that our free cash as a portion of our budget, even at the 2.25 this year, it's not an anomaly from where we were. We sort of hit that town sort of hit its highest around the millennium at 2000. You know, you saw in '99 it was 4%, and then 2.6% and so forth. And as you saw last year, as Darlene mentioned, it was real low, was 0.76%. So again, it's just sort of keeping in perspective, you know, how is this free cash in terms of our operations? You know, it's not as though I wouldn't say that we overtax people when you're having that kind of a return and you saw the sources of the return. I've also provided you with data in terms of our stabilization fund as the percentage of the budget, but also in aggregate, you know, the real numbers as well. And you can see that right now we're about 6% of our budget is stabilization fund at roughly, you know, the state has it at 7.8. We're not high. Our policy for the board and the town is that we should be between 5 and 10% of our budget we should have in cash reserves. We're around the midpoint there. It's slightly under. If you're taking a budget of 115 million or 117 as the budget increases annually, we're actually below the midpoint of that range. In terms of excess levy capacity, i.e., what were we below the levy limit in years? And again, Darlene mentioned 2 years ago, we were at 1.14 below the levy limit in terms of what the town could tax. And I remember Mary Franz standing at that town meeting saying, folks, just want to give you a heads up that this may not be sustainable and you're likely to subject yourself to a boomerang effect the following year. And sure enough, Mary's words were prophetic as we heard the backlash this year because, you know, we weren't able to, we didn't have that free cash as we noted. And we're back to the excess. And again, if you note, if you go back, you'd have to go back, aside from fiscal year 13, you'd have to go back to fiscal year 2000 and 2001 period when they, at that point, they were about 1.5% below levy limit at $750,000. All those other years, what you saw was the town taking its free cash, not going below the levy limit, but scary enough, at the same time, the town was drawing down its stabilization fund, which ultimately led to the reduction of the bond rating in 2007, when the town's, you know, reserves were down below 2%. So again, I think that the data was helpful that it's, you know, that what we're seeing here again is not an anomaly. And then again, I noted earlier, and again, I think it's worth repeating. You look at the effect of net state aid. Again, this year we're getting the same amount of in actual dollars of net state aid in 2015 as roughly we got in the year 2000. You're talking 15 years. We're still getting under $14 million in net state aid. As you saw, fiscal year 2000, we get 13.4. Net state aid, what that means is what do we receive in cherry sheet and lottery aid, net the charges. And sometimes we conveniently forget the charges. You know, at these meetings earlier, we talked about how the schools were getting $250,000 in school choice revenue. However, we really don't mention that we're also losing slightly more in school choice out of the community, not charter, school choice out of the district. So again, that's why you gotta look at the question of what is net state aid. Because when the state does things like lifting the charter school caps and so forth, and you've gotta look at what is the net amount of money that we're getting, because the amount of, and we see it on the cherry sheets, the amount of state aid charges is not insignificant. Again, I hope this data has been helpful in terms of how we can, make decisions on where to go forward. And I guess that's sort of the uncertainty that I have, is where do we go from here in terms of, we're believe it or not, we're starting to assemble the warrant for October town meeting, which will be 3 months away, and which is not a long time. Finance committee, we traditionally be starting to meet after Labor Day and getting the book out the beginning of October. So, we tonight's an initiation of a discussion, but within the next several weeks, we'll have to set apart the direction in terms of what we're going to do in terms of the year coming up ahead. So thank you.
Paul? I'd like to thank you all, too, for the preparation. I think it's tremendous, and I really appreciate it because it really shows us what is there and what has been there, and it's a history of the financial background of the town in a general capacity, too. And does anybody think it would be helpful for anybody to see this? Is this something that we could put on the website?
It's available. It is now.
It is, okay,
All
because
you
I
have
haven't
to-
looked.
Yeah, it's on the website.
Okay.
It's with the agenda for tonight's meeting. Once the meeting's over, we'll then put it in our budget folder, and people can access the data.
Because that's really important for the citizens and the town reps to view going into town meeting. It's wonderful information. Thank you.
I just have a comment. I was recently going through some financial planning of my own and retirement planning, determining when or if I could ever retire. So, Paul, thank you for the spreadsheet you sent me. And what I did is I just did some rough calculations, and rather than just going backwards, I projected forward. So I looked at 2000 through 2014 and what the average tax bill increase was. And I got just a little over 4.25%. So again, for my own calculations, I took that, it's actually 4.29. I was gonna take out the high and the low, try to get a more reasonable number, but it really skewed it, and I didn't wanna be too dramatic. So I took the 4.29, I projected it forward 10 years and 15 years, and I did not compound it. It was just simple interest. And that 15-year number was, again, pretty alarming to me. Just as an individual living in the community, hoping that I could retire in 15 years. In 2014, the average single-family property tax bill is $6,119, and I have projected 15 years later, and again, this isn't compounded, it's almost $12,000. And that's alarming to me. Thinking that in 15 years, my property tax bill, again, not compounded, it's gonna be well over $12,000. And as a senior living on a fixed income, thinking I have to pay $1,000 plus a month in property taxes just to live in my house that I worked hard for and that I paid for. Or say I downsize, or my husband and I downsize, and the real goal is to give it to our younger son, and he can in 10, 15 years get married, raise children in our house. He's gonna have that property tax bill of $12,000 to $15,000 on average. And the average value, my house is valued higher than that, but I'm just using the the average value. But that's what concerns me, and that's why I'm trying to participate in these discussions and help everyone kind of figure it out. I mean, when we say property tax relief, I'm not sure if we're all on the same page as far as what that means. I don't think anybody's here to give anybody a refund, give them a check in the mail. To me, it's slowing down this rate of growth of the property taxes, and that's what I'd like to see us try to do. Because when those seniors call me, and I still get calls saying, you know, we worked hard all of our life, and we paid off our house, and we're struggling to pay our property tax bill. You know, we've downsized from 2 cars to 1 car, and it's a used car. I mean, I don't know what to say to these folks, and that's going to be me in 15 years. It could very well be all of you in 10 or 15 years. And to me, that's where I think we need to start having the discussion of saying, you know, if we're looking at over 4.25% average increase, what can we do to get that down to maybe 2%?
I have as one of the seniors here, okay, I think Stratton and I are probably in that category. I think that what you've done is good, but it's not a linear increase every year. I mean, our bond, our debt is going down. Okay, our debt is going to come to a point where it's going to come to 0, and a lot of our tax money goes to debt. So when that debt goes to 0, then maybe that percentage won't be 4% every year. Now, I
And that would be great if we can, if we would actually pay off the debt and not incur new debt, but I don't see that happening because we have needs. And,
Exactly.
you know, the schools have needs. We're talking about replacing the portables. We got, you know, 2 science classrooms we want to have. This ESCO contract, a lot of that large equipment, some of that's 10 and 15-year life. We got to buy that stuff all over again. So we're always going to have those needs. And I understand it. I'm just trying to do some ballpark, you know, on a
It's frightening.
napkin.
I mean, if I live another 15 years, $12,000 a year is frightening to me, because I'm on a fixed income, basically, right?
It is, and what I'm just saying is I'm trying to figure out how to slow that growth down.
Part of the 4.3% that you're talking about occurred in an era where there was a shift towards the residential side away from the CIP side. And so while the total tax levy goes up 2.5%, as Mr. Chase will tell us all, it matters to the individual what their own particular property class is doing as well. And so again, one way to mitigate that rate of increase is to have a more vibrant, healthier business sector in town, that so that some of that valuation switches back to the CIP and away from the residential. The other thing is, you know, the dollar won't be worth as much when you retire. So, you know, it'll be paid money anyway.
Saved up Monopoly box.
Yeah.
To follow up Mike's point, the other point is the only metric we have statewide is average single-family property tax bill. There are other residential forms of property that don't have that catch. I mean, we're not getting many calls these days from people in the condos complaining about their tax bill increase, and that's because the rate of appreciation for single-family homes is much greater now than it is for condominiums, and as you noted, between commercial and industrial as well. So part of it is the metric in terms of what is what's catching that. But also, Janet, your concern. That's why I said, looking back 15 years, you could have said your tax bill almost doubled in 15 years, because in 99 to 2014, the bill in 99 was 3268. Now it's 6119. It's the same. It's the same going frontwards or backwards, and I would agree. Or I thought you were going when you used the word the issue isn't property tax, it's residential property tax. That became the issue of classification, but you didn't go there. And I'm not saying you're going to go there, but that is the other metric. When you look at some of these other communities, number of these other communities split their residential base different than their commercial base. I'm not saying we want to do that, but I think you have to look at that in the analysis, because all the more reason we don't look as bad is because if other communities are splitting their bills and we're not, it's amazing that our residential property tax increase hasn't been the same. The concern I see going forward is again, how do you sustain that? Because, you know, look what's happening around us. Tom, every community around us essentially is building a new high school. At some point, the 1974-year-old high school is going to have significant investment, because some of the people in this room were here back in 10 years ago when they didn't get the $100 million project, and they clearly understood that the $31 million project didn't solve all the problems with the high school. And again, that's our newest school building. The problem this community is going to have, and it's similar to what Billerica is doing now, where they're doing a high school, and now right after an elementary school. All of our schools were built essentially in that, you know, boomlet period between, you know, late 50s to 1974, and there's going to be a day of reckoning in this community where all of a sudden you're going to have a very aged school infrastructure that's going to have to get aggressively met in a rapid time period. And again, that was why, you're right, at some point in the next 3 to 5 years, there has to be looking towards what is the town's prospects for school facilities, because, you know, we are fortunate we are maintaining them well, but at some point, we're going to be where Tewksbury, Billerica, Wilmington, you know, and so forth, Tingsboro, Dracut, everyone else is, in terms of you have to eventually replace a facility.
I was among those open town meeting members at the McCarthy Stadium when they made that vote for the high school.
Right.
1960-something.
Right.
A very momentous day.
Paul, I got a question. Do you have like a financial model that you can plug in hypotheticals?
Well, we provide every year, and John notes it, we're required by the charter, we provide a 5-year financial forecast that is printed in the book, and he presents at fall annual town meeting. So yes, we do have a financial model. I don't know what you mean in terms of
Like
hypotheticals.
an Excel spreadsheet that you can plug in. Like if I want to model my paycheck, you know, based on how much I want to take out, and then I see the end result, do you have that set up where, you know, for example, if we were to reduce capital from 3 million each year to 2.5 or even 2 million,
Yeah.
you know, that's a small step, but what kind of effect would that have
Yeah,
on our taxes? Do
yeah,
you have that
yeah,
built?
we can do that, you know.
Okay.
But you know.
I would love to see something like that, and I would think that'd give us, you know, something to, you know, I hate to say play with, but, oh, you say it. But, you know, maybe, you know, that could be a subcommittee, because everyone's kind of all looking at each other right now, but maybe it's a subcommittee of each of the groups where we can go in and we can do some hypotheticals.
Well, I really think Mike has got the viable idea. We have to increase businesses in this town. That's what, we gotta increase our
Yeah, but
tax
that can't
base.
be the only idea, because
it's-
that's gonna happen in such a,
But I know that.
you know,
but
5 years from now, we're gonna
tax base is
see the
thing that's gonna
benefit.
help out the residential community in this town. We need more tax.
So so you can increase the tax, you live in a town that's built out, probably 97%? That range, 96, 97%? Where are you gonna build out?
You're gonna
What
start
kind of-
stacking them on 129, because I'm
Are
not
you-
sure those folks
We're
want
gonna
that.
raise instead of going vertical, we're gonna start going horizontal. Plus, there has to be a draw, there has to be a draw for as a business owner myself, there has to be a reason to come here. There has to be a reason.
Right now.
And it
Bill
can't be
Ricker-
just,
Bill Ricker has a classification split and we don't.
but I'm just saying that it can't be I'm talking about from a marketing
Do we wanna
standpoint.
live in Billerica? No offense to anyone, but do we want our town to look like Billerica?
I'm
Do we
just
want
saying that
one
they
twenty-nine to be
have-
nothing but a bunch of shops, or, you know, 10-story buildings?
We have that advantage on them right now. Have we done anything with it?
We have what
What
advantage?
That we don't have a split rate and they do. They're nearly punitive
They have
with their, yeah,
the advantage, maybe.
how so? To attract businesses?
I don't know
They
what
tax their businesses
know
at a
what their
much higher rate
vacancy-
than they tax their residential property.
what their vacancy rate is. You know, it'd be nice to know what
So
their
you are
vacancy
looking at
rate-
a split tax rate?
No, I'm not. I'm saying that if you look at the CIP growth for the last 10 years versus Chelmsford versus Billerica, they're practically the same line. So even though Billerica is taxing their businesses in a way that Chelmsford is not, we don't seem to be taking advantage of that yet.
The problem with increasing business or industrial within the town is it's always bugged me that they go by a different set of rules for taxation. So if they build something and they don't fill it, and they don't pay their share of the taxes because it's empty. And we have that situation now where we have vacancies in buildings. They don't pay maybe Sam could explain that better, but they don't pay their way.
Well, you're right. The businesses pay basically on kind of a cash flow model, and residents pay on kind of the imputed property of the value of the property. And one of the
wouldn't it be
problems for the
nice
residents is
If you lost your job and you could go
Right,
to the
you-
town and say, hey, I don't have a job, I can't pay taxes anymore, but it don't
Right,
work that way.
right. You actually have to sell your property to unlock the value in it, whereas a business is supposedly valued on what, the kind of revenue that they're creating.
But then again, part of the problem is we have empty buildings. Why do we have empty buildings? They're older buildings, they're not as attractive as going to other towns.
Well,
That's right.
I mean, so where do we go with that kind of an approach? Perhaps we need to discuss it with the planning board as well. Perhaps, I agree with you, Nick. We're built out. There's not a lot of land left to build a brand new mall on. But that doesn't mean you can't try some mixed use stuff. You can't tweak the zoning. There are a lot of people working in the 129 corridor as well as people living in the 129 corridor. I don't know that you couldn't have another restaurant there that would capture some of the lunch crowd instead of watching them walk across the town line
And you're
to
correct, and you're
Bellevue.
correct, Mike. But here's the thing, and this is the impression. I'm just going to give you my impression as being a business guy in the area. And the one thing known about Chelmsford is that this is like what people call an incubator town. They come here, the companies start here, they get to a certain level, they outgrow their space quickly, and they're out. Now, we as a town need to figure out how to stop that. This is like a startup town. Companies that start up come here, start up. I mean, there's I'll pick companies out. You got companies like Irvana, you got companies like Hittite. Chrono stays. They have the corporate headquarters here. That's great. That's a fantastic company. There's a few others, but there's a lot of companies that started here, start because they're in a small space, and then they move on to whatever location. And I'm not saying they're moving to a specific town, but I think it's the type of, it's the type of real estate that exists in the town, the commercial real estate. I think it has something to do with what you're trying to say and what some of the other folks are trying to say is the type of buildings here are not the kind of buildings that will attract a manufacturing company to come in here and build a manufacturing plant. When I say manufacturing plant, I'm talking about high-tech manufacturing. They're
Well,
mostly...
it's not Class A space. I mean, Paul, what would you say? Class C?
CB.
Yeah, CB.
It's CB.
Yeah.
And you don't have the zoning that allows that change. And as Bob knows, the master plan in 2010 called for a revisiting of the zoning on 129, and I believe on 2 occasions the planning board denied it or basically stopped it. And so it hasn't even gotten through the planning board, never mind the town meeting.
But that's where I'd like to see us being able to run something through a model. And if you say, okay, if we were to rezone and let's say X number of businesses came in, and this is how much property tax it would generate, and if it's a restaurant, this is approximately how much meals tax it would generate, what effect is that gonna have? And are we gonna spend that money? And now we've got a bigger budget, or are we gonna try to put that towards providing relief?
Janet, I agree with you.
I mean, is it worth fighting that fight of putting additional businesses on 129? I don't know, because I'd like to see the effect of that.
Right, I agree with you. I totally do. I don't know if the business development area has something like that. I don't know if Evans run that type of numbers so that you can actually show somebody or show the planning board, this is something that could be extremely viable. And the master plan looked at it in all different angles, and that's why the suggestion is coming up, or has come up to the planning board, is because that is one of the viable options of gaining more taxes in the town. And if it just keeps being shut down, then, well, we're not going to get any place that way. But it is an option, and I think we still need to bring it back somehow, and I think that would refresh it if there was a new view on it to be presented to the planning board, to the public, so people would understand a little bit more specifically what the numbers are actually, or what they could be actually.
Janet, to a point that you made earlier, you said potentially reducing the capital to a lower rate. Having been
Lower amount.
a lower amount. I understand why you said that, but I also look at the other end where the need is. If you look at, and I don't know, you've probably seen it, but I've been on the capital committee for a few years, and our needs townwide are probably somewhere about, after this year and making our expenditures this year, we still, in the pipeline, have 17.7 $17.7 million worth of stuff in the pipeline.
I
That's
understand.
needed.
There's always gonna be a reason to spend money, Nick.
Right.
I understand
No,
that.
but I understand. But there are things that are legitimate needs.
That's what we do.
No,
But
we-
I
Okay,
understand that.
But here's the point, that I'm not trying to argue with you. What I'm
That's
trying to
all
say to you is, as Paul stated earlier, we're at the pretty close, I won't say the end of life of some of our buildings, but we've been extending the life of our buildings by doing these projects. There's two choices. Redo the whole thing for 40, 50, 60 million, or we nickel and dime it. Pick one. I mean, it's that kind of thing, so.
I don't think a $20 million ESCO contract is nickel and diming. We made a big investment and we took a lot of big things, including recently the Univents,
Yep.
off the capital. And I'd like to see some relief from that capital. I'd also like to see if we have carryover from a prior year of, say, $74,000. I don't wanna then have a capital of $3,074,000. I wanna, we borrow $74,000 less. And I know it's just $74,000, but when we're talking about,
No,
People's property
I won't
taxes.
argue that point. That point
Okay.
I won't argue with you.
all right.
But let me, I'll
And
argue
if
the point.
And if 2 million seems too extreme, then let's talk about what does seem
But
reasonable.
Well, no, it's Paul,
But
I
we
just want to
just
continue
can't-
what my point. I
We
just want
can't
to.
continue down this path of the status quo of spending and expect something to change, and somehow the rate of growth of property taxes changes.
Mhm.
But if you're okay with the rate of the property taxes and what we're
Well-
facing in 10 and 15 years, then be done with the conversation.
No, I'm not. I'm not satisfied either. And-
Then what are you gonna do about it?
But here's my point. My point is we have to make choices. What are the choices that we want to make? Pick it. What's the choice? Do we want to go for a new high school, or are we going to spend $750,000 to redo all the bathrooms? Are we go? You know,
I don't know. I don't know what that looks like.
Right.
Give me a financial model. Let me play with it, and let's see what that looks like. But right now,
I agree.
But right now, I have no options.
Okay.
I got nothing. I got what's put in front of me. No offense, Paul, but I got what's put in front of me. But I want to see many different scenarios, and I want to see the effect of those, and then we can make a decision about what we're willing to live with as a community.
Yeah, no,
That's it.
I understand.
Okay, Paul, do you have something to?
Yeah, I mean, I think what has to be realized is we own 26 buildings in this community. And let's say you've got to reinvest in a building every 20 some odd years. Well, you can do the math. You're going to have to invest in these buildings. You know, the reason that the capital was raised from 2.5 to $3 million is because it had been 2.5 going back well over a decade. And the fact is, you know, as time moved on and costs grew, we weren't adjusting it. And again, even if it's $3 million, $3 million out of a $117 million budget, you can do the math and the percentages. We're probably underinvesting as a percentage our capital as part of our overall budget. And Nick saw it, as you said, on capital this year. We had to forego the high school bathrooms because we wanted to fund the ladder truck.
Yep.
And those choices are still going to be there despite the ESCO project and the investments that are there. Those backups are still there. So it's not because we spend money just for the sake of spending money. It's because we have a capital planning committee whose job is to review the request and come up with a recommendation that then gets presented by me to the town meeting. And that's how it's done. It's not, well, gee, how can we spend $3 million this year? In essence, it's often, how do we whittle it down to $3 million from what are legitimate needs, and whether they're school technology needs, school security needs. We've all been at the town meetings when the people ask, well, wait a minute, why aren't you investing more into the school safety of the children who walk into the schools in terms of technology? And we have to politely say to those people, yes, you've got a legitimate need, but on the other hand, we have these other needs that have to be met in terms of, you know, heating systems and bathrooms and ladder trucks and so forth. And so again, you know, I hear your concern, Janet, but I just think what's inside that concern is a criticism that we're just spending money for the sake of spending money. And I think that's why the data is meaningful, because if you look at us objectively, when we hear the criticism that spending's out of control, that taxes are out of control, those may be all fine and good. But how do you measure yourself? You measure yourself against your peers, and I think I presented the data that shows that there's no substantial data that shows that the spending and investments in Chelmsford are out of line with what's going on either with our neighboring communities or what's going on in Massachusetts. And the big reason for that, as I keep saying in this meeting, is it's the underinvestment of the partnership by the state to the local level. And that's really what's driving all this. It's not because people aren't paying their fair share of taxes in Chelmsford. It's because the state has gotten under the hook. We had a governor who was going to run on property tax relief. The same guy who's sitting in the State House today. What has he done for that? Zero.
$2,500.
Exactly.
Check. I'm waiting for that $2,500
$500 check. Exactly. And
Paul, none of this was a criticism towards you. As a matter of fact,
Sure
I
it
tried
is.
to. No, it wasn't.
when
I
you
don't-
say
I'm
that,
talking
you say.
to my husband.
No,
No, it's not a criticism. As a matter of fact, I tried to particularly say, no offense, Paul. This
Well-
is not, I'm talking to the group here. And at the end of the day.
This is a town issue, this is not a Paul issue.
Exactly. I
I'd like
think
to
it is,
mention,
because
Janet-
at the end of the day, it is town meeting that represents the people that votes the budget. But my facts are also, as I project out, and I'm expressing a concern, that, you know, we talk a lot about providing affordable housing in this community, and we're concerned about all these people that wanna come live in Chelmsford. But I think we need to think about the people that actually live here now.
But you have to understand that the capital budget was pared back $1 million this past year, wasn't it?
No.
Was the
No.
million, it was on the table at first, and they had to bring it back? Wasn't,
About a half
Half a
million.
Yeah,
Half a
about
million?
half a million, but,
About a half
I mean, we pared it back because if you look at the first column going into the next year, it's always big, so we always pare it back. It's always pared back every year. There was a year, a couple of years ago, that I think they went in with like 4.1 million.
Yeah.
It
I think
was
one
we knew
year,
it was
2
never
years
gonna
out,
happen.
it's like five and a half or something
Right,
like that.
and we sit there and we barter. I mean, who's
Right.
who's not gonna get what? I mean,
all of those things that you barter with are needs, so they're gonna have to come from someplace.
True.
Or the infrastructure's gonna fall down. So you're gonna get a better rate.
And one of the things we've sacrificed has been the roads. And it wasn't but 2 months ago, our phones were ringing off the hook because people were complaining about the condition of roads in the community. And clearly, when you got 230 lane miles of road, we're not getting, because once again, the governor wouldn't release the Chapter 90 monies. We lost $1 million of Chapter 90 monies for the last 2 years because this governor wouldn't release those monies. So of course it's going to have an impact on the roads. But yet, when the phone rings, they don't care that we didn't get the Chapter 90 monies. They're just upset because they pay taxes and the roads are in crappy shape. And again, not just Chelmsford, the roads were in tough shape everywhere from the winter.
I
So
have
that's the balance we have.
I have two things that might sound strange, but I just want to throw them out there. It won't be the first time, right?
I'm looking forward to this. What is it? I'm looking forward to it.
One of the thoughts that I had, and I think some people made some comments about our representation. Obviously, we know all the characters that represent us in Beacon Hill, and Tommy and Jimmy and
Corey.
and Corey and
Dave.
Mr. Nagel. Great, nice people. Great, I like them. You know, as far as I'm concerned, when it comes to Chelmsford, they're just a photo op. They don't do anything for us. They do nothing for us. Let's face it, they don't. They're a photo op.
So how do we change that?
So, but that's my point. I think that we need, and it needs to
Glad
be.
you asked.
And, yep, exactly. And it needs to be
Nick for rep.
spearheaded. Well, listen, I'd love to be involved with it, but I think that the Board of Selectmen need to put a subcommittee together with different individuals in town to examine what way that we can set some kind of course, because it's not gonna happen on our own. It's gonna happen in 5 years, when they make the new census changes.
It's
Okay.
more than 5 years, Nick, and we did have a committee at our.
And we need
at
to
the
do it
last-
again.
And when the time comes, but, I mean,
But
we're
see,
6 years
here's
away
my
right now.
point. If you're not, if the squeaky wheel gets the oil, if you're not beating that drum for years, if you're not beating that drum, it's not going to happen. It's not gonna happen. They don't listen to you. They don't care about us. They don't care. Trust me.
Okay,
they don't care
that's
about
your
us.
opinion, Nick, and I happen to disagree with it.
I mean, okay, prove me wrong. What did Paul just say? What did Paul just say?
Well,
We don't get anything.
But Chelmsford is not the only community that's not getting anything.
Well, hold on, we did not get anything either. We just got $5 million for the downtown.
So,
I mean,
anyway,
somebody else
get
got
it.
No, we did.
We didn't get 5 million. It
No,
was
we didn't.
It was authorized in the bond bill. It hasn't been appropriated and released, so we don't have anything.
You only
anyway,
get it
I
when it's in
appreciate
your
this,
hand.
I appreciate the
Guys,
sentiment,
is
Nick,
that
and yes, when
we need to find the direction we have today is not working. So we need to find a new direction, okay? And proper representation down in Beacon Hill is the appropriate way to go. We do not have proper representation.
okay.
Let's face it, we don't.
Not to change.
And they're nice guys.
That's, okay, Kathy?
I thought you had
Change
two
the
things.
subject.
No, keep going, go ahead, go ahead. I
I
don't
just
wanna take
wanted
up.
to ask a little bit about, I noticed that the permit numbers, this is kind of a finite question versus the broad topic we've gotten into. I noticed that the permit numbers are up, and I was wondering about, this kind of speaks to revitalizing, revamping. Do you notice like a lot of tear downs and rebuilds of property in certain sections of town? Because I seem to notice when I drive in the, say, like what I would describe as South Row, Marina Ave, some of those streets, I see a lot of houses that used to be formerly small houses that now are, you know, brand new large houses. Do we see that as something that might be happening to
Most
our-
of this permit, I would say 95% of this permit money is all, is not, it's considered new construction, because they basically take down a house. A lot of times they're small lots, and they have to just build on the foundation that's there already to stay on the same footprint. But you're see that, but those numbers are pretty much all, as Nick was saying, we're built out. So really buying property and building is hard. So people, you know, these small houses are going on the market, and builders are coming in and taking them down and rebuilding. When they did one right on North Road, we saw that one that came down and went right back up. I mean, they tore down the house that was there. It was a small home, and put up another house. That's what we're seeing.
Is that,
It's the
Long
one
Road?
that's almost right after
Right
you
before
go.
Dalton.
Dalton Road.
Yeah, right
Heading
before, right after
towards town,
Dalton Road, if you're
before
heading.
Dalton on the
Oh,
left.
right,
yeah.
yeah.
They
your
took
small
down a
house
house there and then put up, a larger size home there. So that's what we're seeing, because we're pretty much built out, the property.
Right.
There's really no property, much for sale, but the, land.
right.
So they're buying these homes, and
Like Jana was talking about a model, is that can that be projected out as like a long-term benefit? Because it's a home valued at more and taxed at more, I mean, is that,
yeah, and
it's not significant? I guess is what I'm asking.
I just don't know how you would model that, because we don't know who is gonna sell a home to then take it, you don't really,
It's hard to predict, Kathy, who's going to buy a small home and build a large home, depending upon, where it is and how much money they have and what the value is that would,
But
be
I
there.
do, what I do see, if I were someone who was looking for real estate development and I was driving through Chelmsford and I was gonna try to make some money, this is something that I'd be targeting. And I can see that there are certain areas that, might be ripe. And I didn't know if we were seeing any significant.
I have talked to a couple builders in town that, they've been interested in a piece of property that they might want to do that to, but the house was priced too high for them to actually purchase that home, take it down, build it, and resell it and make a profit off it. So it's not profitable enough for them to buy something like that. So it's on the market, basically. It's gonna be, somebody's gonna go in and maybe just do some interior work to it and maybe try to flip it, but not really take it down.
Real estate is still in such high demand in Chelmsford that the prices are still up there. So it's not, and flipping houses, regardless of where you are in the country, is not the business it used to be. One of the things that, if you're done, are you done, Kathy? Because I was trying to jump in a couple of times with some of the other comments that were made on other topics. But when we talk about capital, it was a priority of the former town manager, the school committee, the finance committee, and the board of selectmen at that time, when we were considering where we were going to go relative to school building, was to increase the capital at that time in order to address the needs of the elementary schools in capital, rather than to hit the taxpayers with brand-new schools or large additions. So in order to maintain those properties, we put it into capital rather than to try to have some kind of a debt exemption on the tax bill. And that had continued to a point at which we're looking at trying to bring into, I would say, code for the science areas at the middle school, where we'd have to have a larger project that can't fit into capital. And when we did the $31 million debt exemption, there's a whole list of things on that we put into capital, because we didn't want, or that you would say that the voters did not want to have that high a hit to their taxes at the time. So in the capital, that's spread out over a longer period of time rather than a hit at one point for a large number of an increase that you would have as a debt exemption. So that's where the priorities were as far as capital was, is to try to have the capital keep up with it, because then you're easing the cost of maintaining your facilities over a longer period of time, rather than saying, oh, we're just gonna let this go, or we're gonna tear down Byam School or Harrington School, or whatever it is, and build a mega complex in that area, and it's gonna cost us $75 million. So we're gonna build a brand new high school on a different location, or expand what we have, and oh, by the way, people, that's gonna cost you another $175 million, and we're only gonna get 50% from MSBA, provided that they accept it, because all the rules have changed. So there's a whole lot of factors that has gone into why we have capital higher, and what the impact would be in the future if we didn't have that capital, but had to then take and have a larger facility project, and what that would be to the tax rate at that point in time. So everything has tried to ease those projects into the tax base. Doesn't mean that we all like to pay whatever the higher taxes are, but we also wouldn't want to pay what it would be if we ignored that, or lowered those amounts and later on then wished we hadn't done it. So when coming from that point and now moving more forward myself in this whole process, I've seen the value of having a larger capital, maintaining facilities, maintaining technology, and in the other parts of the infrastructure, because it has been a less of an impact on the tax rate than had we had a reduction and then had to go forward with bigger projects for the future. What is the current rate of vacancies, building vacancies? Ballpark.
It's between 6% and 7%. It's not a
It's not a huge, it's
market
not
out
double
there.
digits like it was at
No.
one point. And what is that in comparison to other communities in the Commonwealth?
Well, we're probably better off than the Commonwealth as a whole.
Is there any community in the Commonwealth that is less than that?
Oh, sure. Yeah, the closer you're getting to the 128 corridor, your Burlingtons and so forth have a lower vacancy rate than we do, but part of that's location. And part of that, going to the question about why Billerica is doing a little better than Chelmsford in terms of some of the commercial, is because they actually have a better location in terms of the 128 corridor than we do.
Or they have the space to
And they
build the
have the space-
manufacturing?
They have the space for the manufacturing, and also it then tends to perpetuate itself. If you've got a manufacturer of certain products there, you tend to get the economies, adjacent to it. And we're sort of further down the Route 3 corridor. So yes, we have a good overall vacancy rate, but it's not as good as what you would see, as you move down to the Bedford and even Burlington.
So in the communities that we have as comparables with the state, okay, where do we fall in vacancy rates in comparison to those particular communities?
I'd have to go grab that data. I don't know the
Well,
the data.
where I'm
in
going with
Franklin
it
at
is
this point
that
and so forth.
we recently, well, actually, I got back from Maryland about 2 hours ago, but there were a tremendous number of very large buildings in that area that were vacant, everywhere in that western part of Maryland, just outside of Washington DC, where you would think that there would be a lot more businesses because of what you could be doing with the government. But that's only relevant in the fact that we're having the discussion, which I didn't realize that we were gonna do that, in terms of that the vacancies that we have are such a lower percentage. So when we had double digits on that, then it went to the town, and where we were with any of the economic development committees to see how you could promote the town, sell the town, and again, find out, how do we market our location, or market what we have and what the benefits might be if you came to Chelmsford. And that's one of the only things that I could see in terms of trying to increase your tax base. If you wanted to find out why everybody's leaving, then your economic development committee or representatives would have to be liaisons to all those other businesses to find out, well, why are you leaving? Is it because you don't have enough space? Is it because it's too expensive? Is it because you need a new location? And instead of just trying to figure, just kind of brainstorm as to what it was, then you'd have the real reasons, unless when they go to leave, Paul, they're calling you and saying, we're leaving because, does anybody have like an exit?
We don't have there aren't a lot of companies leaving. The big notable one was Goodrich, and they left and went to Westford because the property that was owned and the building they were leasing was underwater, and they weren't going to sign a new lease when the building itself was insolvent, and so they went over to Billerica. That was sort of the only major, company that is left. What we're starting to see is, as Nick sort of noted earlier, we're seeing some of the firms in Chelmsford being acquired, and so forth. But thus far, they haven't left. They've just been acquired by other companies.
Just piggybacking on top of that idea, I know we haven't established too many action items, and it might be a little bit outside the scope of what we're doing here as far as how we're going to spend the free cash and some other things. But I think one of the ideas that was brought up was some of the forecasting regarding some of the economic development activities that Evan and the Economic Development Committee has been working on. I would like to see, not for our next meeting here, but at some point, some of that type of information, those what-ifs about if some types of renovations would happen, what type of tax revenue that could bring into the town. I think that supporting data would be really helpful to some type of argument for, redevelopments of not just 129, but some other areas that were identified in the master plan. And I just think it's important to note again, we've talked about it a few times, but there isn't one, silver bullet or something that's going to fix all of the tax problems. But all these things we've talked about tonight put together, if we're working on all of them moving forward, I think it will make a difference. So, all the ideas we brought up tonight, maybe we are mostly built out 97%, but there is some potential there. We know there is, so we should be pursuing it all. But that's one particular area that I'd like to see a little more information.
And I really think that you can't look at a possibility as a negative, because there always might be a way to get around whatever that negative is. And I'm a firm believer of that. And I keep thinking of the 129. People are going to complain. Well, people are going to complain anyway, and there's always going to be complaints. But there's so much possibility there, and I just think it should be brought back. But to the planning board, I think it should be brought back in another way, and with more specifics, with things highlighted, even more extensively. I just think it's a possibility, and I don't like to let that part sit. I don't know how many other areas other than maybe a little bit further north than us on 40 or something.
What about Route 4 going out of town? Route 4 going from North Chelmsford towards Dingsboro. That's an area there that's a lot of it's zoned.
Right, it is. It could be zoned differently.
And it's not fully utilized up there either.
No.
That's right.
You have to make sure that you have good access from that highway. That's what draws companies.
Oh, for 120.
From the exit to where my front door is at my office, 3 minutes.
Well, that's why 129 is.
That's what you know what I mean. So that's just again, it's all marketing. It's all how you market it and how you present it.
Well, but
I think it's critical, and you make a good point. I mean, that's something that we I think we need to do.
But the area has been marketed. It has been marketed for years. Evan Belansky came to the master plan and said, we've done this, we've done that, what else can we do? And we looked at it from all different angles. And, we created the possibilities of looking at it differently. But if certain boards don't want to look at it differently, you can't go past that. And that's what I'm saying. I think you have to look past the negatives sometimes.
I think the first tenants we had out there was Apollo. Apollo built a lot of those buildings. They were the original tenant out there, and I think they put.
Sun was out there, Maycom was out there.
But I think Apollo was first, and they built them, and that's over 20 years ago, probably 30 years ago, or maybe even more. And that's how old those buildings are, and they're probably not adequate for some of today's high tech, as you say.
And if you look at some of those buildings, what they've done is they've subdivided them to a point that, they're small, like I use the word incubator companies, but basically that's what a little incubator, Bob is familiar with this kind of stuff, small little incubator companies, 15 people, maybe 20 people in it, and then they get bought by somebody, you know what I mean, and they're gone, you know what I mean, or they're not gonna be able to expand. Yeah, they could expand into the space next to them, but you're gonna get another 5,000 square feet, because you only got 5,000 square feet, kind of thing. So, it's the way the buildings are, it's the way the construction is set up. I think if most of our buildings are class, B and C, and some of them really need to be A, if it's a planning board issue, or some kind of economic development issue, then that's, I think, part of what Sheila's trying to say, is that we need to try to reach to those organizations and see if we can help influence some of those folks in asking us to move in a different direction. to help us, develop those areas more.
What's
I don't know what's done from a marketing
The other
standpoint.
thing you have to think about is you have residential neighborhoods behind these
True,
places,
yeah.
okay?
Yeah.
And, that was what most of the, outcry was from when they came in with 129. Now, if they came in with 129 and said, we wanna knock a building down and build another in its place and build it 4 stories high, I wouldn't have a problem with that. But what they're doing is they're increasing, they wanted to increase density on an existing lot. They wanted to put a cleaners, or they wanted to put a ice cream place. That isn't, I don't think that's changing the building. It's changing, the amenities. But I think they should be looking at the whole picture. Can they take for instance, can they take a building that's on Alpha Road, okay, and make it into a taller building and retain the parking they have and be able to attract people to come in?
Someone put in I think it's a 5-story, maybe 6-story building in Marlboro. And what they did is the top floors, not the base floor, but the top floors are all offices, businesses. But the bottom floor is a bank,
Right.
a food place, a laundromat. All the amenities, as you say,
Right.
are in those buildings because it's convenient. Next door is a kid's daycare center.
But that isn't
I
what
mean-
they proposed. They
No.
proposed something
I'm
entirely
not
different.
proposing one way or another. What I'm saying is that it's all a planning issue, so I don't want to get carried away.
So you're saying having the right plan is important.
Exactly. And I think it might need to be,
Right.
examined.
Increasing the density on the lot is not the answer. Changing the building so that it's saleable is more important.
And the value is
Right.
a higher value.
And like what you just said, being able to put retail stuff on the bottom floor.
I mean, I enjoy the discussion, but I think we all realize that, it's gonna take some time and to develop and implement, and then even achieve the results from that type of rezoning. But I guess the concern I have here is that, it's the 20th of July, we'll be at town meeting in 3 months. We're gonna be sending out budget guidelines for fiscal year 2016 in 10 weeks. And I'm not sure if I have any clear understanding tonight what sort of priorities and direction that we are all together to be going, which is sort of what brought all this about, was how do we meet this conflict of the school committee's stated goal of full day kindergarten with no fees, funding our ongoing OPEB liability, and providing meaningful tax relief. Because clearly these decisions are going to have to get made in the next several weeks, or certainly within the next couple of months. And I don't know that I sort of have a clearer picture than when I walked in the room this evening.
Well, let me throw something out there, okay? And I'm not going to speak for the whole committee, but I hope that some of you jump in if I say the wrong thing. Our plan for FY 15-16 is to have full-day kindergarten. And have full-day kindergarten with no fees. And what we ask the town to do for us is to give us what you've given us basically on an average basis over the last 10 years. I'm not asking you for any more money. I think it might be a 0.5 or something, or, I'm sorry.
I
think it's
I don't know that
0.15.
we've run the.
We
I
did,
see what
we
you're
ran the
saying.
numbers.
Yes,
we ran the numbers.
I understand what you're saying now. Yeah,
And-
And
average
you
of
made basically the
last-
presentation that Frank gave at the spring annual town meeting.
Correct.
Okay.
And then we'll cover the rest, and then we'll absorb it over that period of time, and I'll say, we'll take our lumps over the next 4 years, but we feel that it's critical for our district to have full-day kindergarten. Absolutely critical.
And I'm not going to disagree with you, but the point that I would point that I want to make, and I think the finance committee has seen this, when you look at the discretionary spending of the town, when you peel apart the benefits and the debt service and everything else, and the Neshoba Tech assessments and the retirement assessment and so forth, funding in the schools is roughly 2/3 of our discretionary spending, okay? And that's not a criticism, but my whole point of saying that is that's all fine, and I'm not opposed to that, but if that's a reality and you want a little bit more than roughly the 3% or so that we've been providing, which is above the 2.5 levy limit, then the question is, well, then how do we achieve that at the same time meeting those other obligations and providing substantial tax relief, which I still don't have the definition of what substantial tax relief is, but I'm just trying to say is how do we come to a consensus on, because I'm not saying don't do that, but the bottom line is we can't do all three. We just don't have the financial means to fund the needed increase for full-day kindergarten, meet our $1 million OPEB obligation, and provide substantial tax relief. I think Darlene has shown that there aren't sustainable numbers in the town's budget that can provide that. Again, not knowing what next year's local aid and other stuff is going to be, but let's not kid ourselves. The past is a prologue. I don't think any of us are expecting that we're going to get a 10% increase in local aid next year, no matter who's governor and who's sitting at the State House. So I'm not arguing with you. I understand your point. I just don't know how we.
You asked that.
Exactly,
The
yeah.
team
Right.
And if I stated incorrectly.
Right,
to
and
the
I've
rest
heard
of
it.
the School committee
Okay.
members,
Right.
I think we're pretty clear where the path we would like to go.
But it is the benefits that would be a discussion as well. What are the extended benefits through the year, the long-term benefits, that's not the right word, but the extended benefits through the year for the additional personnel that you would,
You know, I think we're not ready to put on a full-blown presentation tonight.
Yeah.
I've spoken with Frank about this, and I think we'll be bringing something forward. Perhaps at the next tri-board meeting, depending on when it happens. We are aware that obviously the devil is in the details with something like
Right.
this, and we need to get the story straight. As came up in a previous discussion, having the right plan is important. So we're not going to try to just cobble something together here tonight. I will point out that the town's tax revenue growth has run about 3 or 3.5% over the last 5 years, not just 2.5%, because you get the new growth as well.
Right.
If I could on that point, Paul, are you prepared to give the school committee, anticipate giving the school committee the same types of increases you have on average for the past 10 years, somewhere around that 3%, if they can fit full-day kindergarten into that type of model? Are you prepared to be able to fund that?
I don't see any reason, in my mind, to change the traditional funding support that I provided in the 7, 8 budgets I've done for the school department. I believe that I've been fair, if not supportive of the school system. And I don't see that changing. But on the other hand, I'm getting pressure from the Board of Selectmen, quite frankly, to provide property tax relief, and I don't know how I can reconcile this.
I don't think you're getting pressure from the Board of Selectmen. I think you're getting pressure from me.
No, it's not just you, Bob.
Okay.
And then I don't hear the others. I don't hear the others. George isn't here tonight, but I haven't heard Pat and George argue saying we don't want to provide property tax relief, right?
And I think kind of is some guidelines as you're looking for. I think it would be, as Darlene has said, we need to have sustainable tax relief if we're going to have something. What we did before, where it ended up being a spike. We had a 1-year tax reprieve or whatever you want to call it, and then the next year we had to use up all that excess tax levy. And I don't know. Quite frankly, I think $1 million of tax relief is significant. I know that probably is not sustainable, so maybe it is a number less than that. But we also do have to address the OPEB. I know we haven't mentioned that much this evening. And granted, I don't think that can be fully funded, but I'm in favor of funding it the way that we have been as part of the budget, as you proposed for this year. So granted, there's not a way to do everything exactly the way that we want it, but I mean, my preference would be to try to cover all of them to some extent.
I have a question.
Thank you, Pat.
And this has been asked before, I'm sure. But if we were to give $1 million in tax relief, how would that come out on the average tax bill?
Now,
What would the reduction be?
I
Now,
think Paul has mentioned
right,
70, right?
$72. That's assuming there's no continued shift. The problem is when we put that number out, remember at town meeting a couple of years ago, we had the shift between values that basically decimated that number. But the answer to the question is that $72 would roughly be the impact of $1 million of tax relief. Now again, the average bill right now is $61.19.
Right.
So if you provide that $1 million, instead of the bill going up roughly $150, it's going to go up $70, so it's going to go up to roughly $6,200. Now, assuming you sustain that $1 million going forward, your now new base at $1 million of sustainable relief is $6,200. That means the next year that's going to go up 2.5% by another $150, and it goes. In other words, that you're just resetting that 1 million, if that's the number, whatever it is, that $72 becomes permanent, but yet it doesn't compound because you'd have to then build upon that million.
It's a one-time shot.
It's a one-time
But
shot.
It's still a one-time shot.
I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but recognize it what it is. It's not gonna solve the 100% tax increase in 15 years phenomenon by a $72 one-year shot. It's gonna give you $72 that you can save per year over 15 years.
But also, I think one of the real problems is, it's not like I come away, my taxes still went up, instead of going up 150, they went up 72. So psychologically, in my mind, I'm not getting tax relief because my bill went up $70. And on top of that, psychologically, I didn't actually get a little check in the mail that said, Kathy, you can go to Target with $72. It's, it's just a reduction. So I think.
I never said that my definition of
No, I'm
property
just-
tax relief is somebody getting a check. But
I'm just saying
I
that's
am
what the
also
problem
not,
is.
I am also not gonna tell anybody what $72 means to them. I mean, we may heckle it here and say, big deal. $72 is a lot to a lot of people.
No, I
So
totally agree with that.
I'm not gonna say anything about that.
But my point is that psychologically, their bill still went up $70. It's not as if their bill went from 100 to 30. Their bill went from 100 to 135 instead of 170. So that's what I'm saying. We're saying the words that their bill is actually being reduced, but it doesn't feel that way, I think, is my point.
And I
I just
think a
wanna
lot of it is the way that it's presented. Some people do say we give money back. No, we don't. We absolutely don't give money back. And I think we need to not use that terminology. We need to be clear that it's just not the maximum increase, if this is what we choose
Again,
to do.
but I want to stress that person saved, we
Yes,
saved
they
that
did.
person $70
That's
in
what I'm
2012. In 2013, we charged that person $300 because we could not sustain the $1 million. And that's, I'm not saying what to do with this money, but be cautious because I know there's not going to be another $1 million next year if that is what happens at town meeting. If town meeting is approved to go to the tax base, I know my undesignated fund balance is reduced immediately at that's my new starting level. And if expenses exceed revenues next year, I'm then in another deficit, it will hit undesignated fund balance. Again, I'm in another direction. We will be fiscal 13 all over again, so that when John sends out those tax bills, the phones start ringing and they start calling the selectmen. But that's just a caution. I mean, it's nice. We gave everybody, it'll be $72 or $75 to people, but that's only if we can continue that.
That's why we need to have a policy in place that says every year we're gonna give a certain percentage of free cash back.
But
We're gonna apply it to the tax.
But you don't have a fixed amount of free cash every year, Janet, so that policy won't allow for a steady or constant reduction. It's gonna,
I said a percentage.
Right,
And I
but the
had some outs in there that said that, if there's other circumstances where we can't do that, then so be it. It had a lot of flexibility, and I'm not here to advocate my free cash policy, but that is a mechanism for a consistent amount each year.
Just another suggestion that I hear there may be some projects that didn't get funded. Instead of borrowing for projects that might need to be, there's the free cash, which can be put to projects which then don't hit the taxpayers borrowing. It's just another way of using your free cash. You're giving back, you're gonna borrow for it anyways.
I think Bob's idea was a good idea at the beginning of the pilot program. I think that's something we probably ought to at least take a look at. I mean, there's a possibility it could be somewhat of a revenue stream. I mean, I'm not sure how many businesses in town or organizations fall into that category, but if some of them, were willing to, to give us some money, then it would be something we could probably count on every year that isn't there right now.
I think we should contact Lowell and see how
Yeah,
successful it's been.
we
for them.
should. I mean,
Tried that.
I think it's worthwhile trying.
The assessors have the list of which properties are
tax exempt,
tax
sure they
exempt.
do. Sure they
I guess we could send them all a letter.
Really, I think the whole problem that we really have is fundamentally what our expenses are. And I think that's a big issue. And I know the federal government, the big thing that they've done in the last 3 years is they've changed their philosophy. A lot of the departments are going through, all new employees are changing their plans, their medical and pension plans. that don't have the existing or the current plans. Anybody that's a current employee for the federal government gets the lifetime benefits, lifetime medical benefits. Going forward, any new employees in certain departments don't get that anymore. They have a 401k plan, and they're all tied into Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid. That's what they're all gonna be all tied into.
Sure.
I don't know if that's a direction for the state or for our town, if the state dictates, I'm not sure if
The state
dictates.
dictates.
Every position,
Yes,
all positions,
Yes.
every department.
yes. Yeah, the state
collective
dictates,
bargaining.
the state, it's collective bargaining, but it's also a state dictate of 20 hours or more per week, you have to enroll them in the retirement system. Part of the reason why you said, no, but
What kind of retirement?
in the state's retirement system.
State retirement.
Right. And part of the reason why the cities and towns haven't pushed the state to get out of the retirement system is, believe it or not, they've done the calculations that the towns would actually pay more contributing to Social Security than they actually would pay contributing to the retirement system. Because of the 6% that you have to pay to Social Security, towns don't actually pay that now on a new employee. You know, people forget, and I don't get off to another tangent, but the people get upset about the large pensions, the number of public employees. What they don't understand is that these people are contributing 11 and 13% of their pay, as opposed to a 6% of your pay if you're on Social Security.
Right,
But the bottom line is that
There's formulas out there. If you take a look at the way it's
Right.
drawn up, the way the life expectancy of people today
Mhm.
is huge compared to what it was, 25, 30 years ago. So the pension plan model worked great, back then. But now
Right.
people are living 25 years after they retire,
Exactly.
30 years after they retire.
and they haven't changed the.
Exactly.
Exactly.
They haven't changed
And
formula.
whether that's for teacher retirement or public safety or what have
They
you.
started to change it for new employees going in. I think when my dad was a teacher, he was putting in like 5%. I mean, as a new employee,
Right,
I'd
they
pay
increased
9
the
or
percentages, it's
11%.
9 plus 2.
Yeah.
Right, but it's still, if you
It's
take
9
out,
plus
if
two.
you
Huge
compound,
difference.
well, if someone's in the program 25 years, and even you compound it at that 10% rate,
Mhm.
you consume that value in 8 years after you retire. Beyond that, towns pick it up. So the town basically picks up the bill.
Yeah, I don't
going
think that's
forward all the way
correct.
out. So it is, 8 years.
Okay.
Paul, I'm wondering if you could address OPEB. Are you planning to put that in your budget?
Well, yes, it's in the budget this year.
But
and-
differently than last year?
No. And in fact, if you recall, the suggestion came from the Finance Committee, where the Finance Committee said to me, we support you funding OPEB in the budget, we'd like you to fund it within the recurring appropriations and not from free
Yes,
cash.
yes.
We were able to get about halfway there this year.
Okay.
I'm hopeful that in the future we can get 100% of the way there. So
you're
that
talking
is the
this-
goal.
When you say 100%.
Meaning that
which, like,
that we're
this
not,
year-
we're not funding, we're not having to come back to fall town meeting like we are this year, looking
Right.
for an extra
That's what I mean.
$500,000 to
So
unbalance the
that's-
budget. The goal would be to fully do it, fully
Exactly.
fund it.
So we're
But I-
looking toward that.
That would be the goal, but again, I have a request from the school department, to fund the cost of the portion of the full-day kindergarten. And then, as you can see, I'm getting requests from the Board of Selectmen on how to produce a budget that's below the levy limit.
Are you trying to say we're not helping you at all?
I'm just trying to point out the conflict that's there, quite frankly.
I'd like to just make a comment. I'm a senior citizen, so I speak for the senior citizens. I'm a little older than you, I think.
A little.
A little. And it's interesting. I receive, I think, 1 point something % increase in my retirement income. And I just wanted to buy an automobile. The current one that I have has 214,000 miles. And I figured it out, I did an analysis, and I can't afford it. It's very, very, and when you look at the gas prices, when you look at
Insurance.
food prices and et cetera, the costs are going up. Now, I'm sure what Paul is gonna do, he's gonna take last year's budget and update the numbers, and give us, his proposal. But within that budget, I think you have to look at all the expenses. I think we talk too much about the surplus revenue, but I think you have to look at all of the expenses. For example, in the personnel, I suspect that's probably 70–80% of the cost of the budget. So we have to look at you know, the cost of personnel, the negotiation, the perks that we give, and whatever. There is room, in my opinion, if you look at the total budget, not just surplus revenue, to come up with some tax relief. How much, I don't know. I think you have to go through the budget and say, for example, I think I had asked Paul, how many automobiles do we have? He said 200. And I'm saying to myself, do we need 200? And maybe we can eliminate one or two of them, you know. So I think there's a lot of room that can be looked at in the budget to see where we can cut costs.
Well, we point out, I think the school committee made the point earlier, all of our contracts go through fiscal year 16, our labor contracts, aside from the fact that we're in mediation and arbitration with our 2 police unions. But all those other contracts are fixed for the upcoming year that we'll be budgeting for. And I think, as Kathy and others know, when we compare ourselves to these comparable communities, we're not a high-paying community. Our teachers aren't paid high compared to comparable communities, and neither are our other employees as well, and that becomes a challenge, Strat. And you can imagine that the tension gets even tighter when basically we're at the table saying, we'd like to pay you more, but we can't afford it, and then they come across the table and say, well, wait a minute, you know, what do you mean you can't afford it? You have cash, and oh, by the way, you know, you're not at your levy limit. So I mean, and I'm not trying, but you got to understand the pressures that are coming. You get it from all sides. You get it from the taxpayer. You also get it from organized labor.
That's
you
where
know.
we argue.
Exactly, and you get it from all sides, and you got to recognize the tensions that are there. And we found out it was difficult even when we didn't have the money not to settle these contracts.
I think to that point, it's important to make sure that we're paying off our liabilities as well before we're, you know, giving money back to the taxpayers, which, you know, is really just offsetting the increase. But OPEB, for example, you know, that it is a real liability. So I think, you know, we talked about this last year, but ignoring that doesn't make the problem go away. So I would like to see us at least funding the $1 million a year before we're going to go ahead and be providing tax relief. And again, one of my priorities is full-day kindergarten. So I know you're looking for direction. I'll just say those are 2 of my priorities, and then the third priority is trying to maintain a 7.5% in the stabilization fund, right between the 5 and 10%. I know we've been creeping down, but that gives us flexibility with our bond rating, but also with some borrowing if we ever need to try and offset borrowing if we could, you know, use that in the future. So it might be something to think about, trying to maintain a little closer to the 7.5% stabilization fund with some of this money. Of course, making sure we are paying the full $1 million towards OPEB, and one of my priorities is full-day kindergarten. And then if we have money left over after we're paying our liabilities and those other things, then maybe we can talk about some of those other options, putting some of that towards the tax bill next year. But I just want to make sure we're paying those things first.
Matt, how much do we need to get to the 7.5?
Yeah, that's a good question. Might be close to $1 million.
We're at 7.2, right?
And we wouldn't have to do it in
Six-
1 year,
six.
but I'd like to see us.
We're at
Well, as the budget increases each year,
Yeah, well, I mean, each year.
7.5% increases.
You know, might be something to think about, though. I mean, you know, as we're talking about what we're going to do with our free cash every year, putting a
Right.
very small amount of money, like a 2.5% of the 7.5% towards it, so we don't all of a sudden get in a situation like we are now, where to get back to 7.5% is going to take $1 million.
More than that.
And I know that number is fluid; it does go back and forth, but
Right now, there's 7.2.
well, the 7.2, so it's probably less than $1 million.
Yeah, but no, it isn't, because remember, our budget is now
Not yet.
115 million, 115
Close
plus
to $1
million.
million.
So we're roughly around 6.3% is our stabilization
We're at
fund balance.
6.3%.
You'd need probably $1.5 million to get you to 7.5%.
I'm just saying, I don't want us in a couple years down the road to realize we're back at only 5% in our stabilization fund, and then something happens. We don't have any flexibility if we want to borrow against our stabilization fund. So I think our stabilization fund is a priority, OPEB's a priority, and full-day kindergarten's a priority for me.
One final question. I'd like to know, or receive at some point, what we have in revolving accounts. I think that's very important to see what other expenses that are not part of the budget.
The news isn't good there, and you can share with that.
Well, both in the, by the way, the school
Right.
department and the.
Yeah, I will be presenting, I'll be presenting my final year-end numbers. I said we're still waiting for interest, and a lot of the revolving accounts Interest stays with those funds, and we haven't finished all the interest yet for June. John's interest statements are still coming in, so I don't really have all those final numbers. I wasn't really ready to present those tonight, but I will be presenting to the Board of Selectmen all of the final fiscal 14 special revenue grant accounts, all those other accounts that are outside the general fund. I will be doing that. One thing, and I don't really want to speak for Kathy McWilliams, the school business manager, but one thing that she was short in her general fund budget, and also school lunch ended the year in a deficit, so she needed to cover those deficits. And a lot of those deficits were funded through some revolving accounts. We moved some money over from the child care account. We moved some money from her circuit breaker. So we did a lot of moving around to funds. And then when she presented that to the school committee, I think last week.
That's done every year.
Yeah,
Those revolving
it's just
accounts
kind of
are
done.
used every year.
With the school committee's approval, she keeps them informed. They know that happens.
How much was it this year?
We moved probably a total, probably $500,000 of money was moved between funds.
Well, that includes the movement around the circuit breaker and.
The circuit breaker, exactly.
So,
And
that's a pretty normal
Yeah, we took
number.
200. Yeah.
I don't
I
understand.
will be presenting those
You
when I
have to,
present them to
circuit
you. I'll be
breaker
telling
money
you.
has to be used for special education.
I understand.
You have to.
Yeah.
I mean, so if that, and that sits there for that specific reason, because in special education, we don't know at any one given time if one or two special ed kids move into our town, we have to have special transportation for them, they have to go to a special school. We don't know those things, so that's why the revolving account sits there. So at the end of the
What
year,
revolving account sits there?
the circuit breaker.
Circuit breaker.
Right, so that sits there, and at the end of the year, when she has to reconcile, that's what Kathy uses. She goes, so her circuit breaker.
I'm
account
interested
is-
in the other
Yeah, I took.
revolving accounts.
Yeah, I'm just. But with her circuit breaker, I do have those numbers. We took around $400,000 from the circuit breaker account. She had a $500,000 surplus. In that, there was a balance of like 500,000. We took 400, so we've drained it down to strained down to $87,000 in circuit breaker. One account that's that we know we weren't touching is the school choice account. The school choice account is there, and that account is being rolled over. That is the money they're going to be using, I think, and I don't want to be speaking, but I think that'll be the money they'll be using for kindergarten. I think that's kind of earmarked for that. And just but I will be presenting and having reports, a year-end report on all of the revolving accounts that we have, even our donation accounts. Donation accounts, basically, the money is donated for a specific reason and has to be used for that, expenditures are for those specific reasons. For example, we have people donating right now for the 911 memorial. They're going to be putting out in front of the new fire station. So people, so that money sits in that account and it rolls over, and the expenditures can only be spent for that memorial that's going to be put out there. But I'll be doing those year-end when we get all the numbers and all the interest that comes in on those funds. I have to just finish up those. But I'll be presenting those probably in September timeframe.
Okay, I want to thank everybody for coming, and just an announcement. At our last Board of Selectmen meeting, we did create a subcommittee of Janet and Matt, who is looking at our financial policy. So if anybody has any thoughts on ideas on how they can be modified, you can talk to one of them, and we're hoping to have something back from them sometime in the next few months, and hope you also remember to talk to Darlene and Paul and John about how that would affect the overall town financial management, too.
I'll make note of that.
Make a note of that.
And we'll be posting the meeting, announcing and posting the meeting, so we welcome anyone to join us and participate.
Okay, so,
We gotta,
oh, we have another
introduce our
another
new member over
person
here,
to,
right?
yep. Tom, if you want to
Tim
introduce him.
Clancy.
Put me on the spot, yeah.
He kind of snuck in at the beginning.
A little bit,
Tim, we're very happy to have you with us.
Thank you
and,
very much.
Glad to see you, Ed.
We can introduce ourselves around the table real quick if you'd like. That
I'm
way
sure
we
I'll learn all the names
Okay,
eventually.
all right.
That probably wouldn't help him much, yeah. Okay, so I'll entertain a motion to
The only one
adjourn.
you have to know is
So
Paul's.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thanks, everybody, for coming.